I used to go to this bar that was a bit on the seedy side, I guess I'd say. It was one of those bars that was just sort of set in against the side wall of a building. It had a very small inside, a jukebox, and a ton of neon signs. There were also, of course, a bunch of regulars who came in there every night. Very seldom did anyone new come in, actually. I was one of the very few women who did, though I only came in about once a week on Fridays after work just to relax a bit. Around Christmas time one year, a new guy came into the bar. He was attractive enough, and there was some interest right away. I had a boyfriend, though, who I was very happy with. After looking at me across the bar for more than half the night, he finally approached me and offered to buy me a drink. I declined and let him know I was already in a relationship, and I didn't really want to sleep around. He insisted he didn't want to sleep with me. He only wanted my heart. Every week when I made my way over to the bar after work on Friday, he would be there on the spot. I learned that his name was Charlie, and he seemed to be new in town as well. He came up to talk with me each time I was there. He would always ask me if I had broken up with my boyfriend yet, and when I told him we were still together, he would ask why my boyfriend wasn't there with me. I let him know that my boyfriend worked later than I did, and I always came here because I knew the bartender anyway. I don't think he really believed me though. He would just keep on talking to me. It wasn't too irritating at first. I supposed it was kind of flattering he was interested in me, but each and every time I came in for my drink on Friday, he would ask me right away if I'd broken up with my boyfriend yet. And he would always emphasize that part too, yet. It began getting very uncomfortable on Valentine's Day that year. My boyfriend happened to have the day off work, so he decided to go with me to the bar this time. It was actually really nice. The two of us were just having a relaxing drink together. When Charlie came into the bar and saw me with my boyfriend, I could tell right away he was not pleased. Rather than come up to me though, he just kinda glared at us from across the bar. He had the worst look on his face, and even with a couple of drinks in me, I was feeling very uncomfortable. After a few hours had passed by, Charlie finally approached us. With my boyfriend right there beside me, he asked me if I'd broken up with him yet. Brandon, of course, took offense to this, and Charlie began to laugh in his face. He pushed Brandon down onto his bar stool and told me, "Why are you dating this pansy?" Of course, Brandon got up and pushed Charlie, who then pulled out a switchblade. The bouncer was immediately over there and completely manhandled Charlie as he threw him out of the bar. All the while, Charlie just kept screaming that all he wanted was my heart. Even though I was sure Charlie would never be allowed to come back to that bar, I stopped going there altogether. I had been a regular for years, but that experience completely ruined it for me. Many months passed by after, and I'd mostly dismissed the situation with Charlie by now. I'd had a very stressful situation at work though, and I really needed a drink. I figured enough time had passed and it was unlikely Charlie would be allowed back into that bar. So I went to go have a few drinks. The bartender asked me why I hadn't been in for a while, and I just told him I'd been really busy. After having had my fill, I was ready to head on home. Upon arriving, I went to bed pretty quickly. While I was sleeping though, I was suddenly woken up by a strange thumping noise. It was a very rhythmic knocking sound coming through the wall of the house. At first, I tried to ignore it and tried to go back to sleep as well. I'd only dozed off for a very short period of time before the noise woke me right back up. I was a little bit too tired at this point to be scared or concerned. I kept on trying to go back to sleep, but it just wouldn't happen. When this repeated rhythmic sound never stopped, I got up and looked over at the window. I screamed. Charlie was standing at my window looking in at me, holding some kind of animal heart in his hand. He was thumping the side of the wall with his other hand, and he had written in blood on the window, "All I want is your heart." I quickly ran to the phone and dialed 911. The police got there quickly as well, but Charlie had already fled. Fortunately, they picked him up only an hour later. He was charged, but there wasn't much they could really get him for. He insisted it was just a sick way of trying to woo me. It wasn't long before he was set free as well. The man made my life a living hell from then on. He would show up all the time, especially when I least expected it. He never really did anything. He would always just indicate he wanted my heart. I was in hell because I couldn't afford to move, and my boyfriend couldn't always be with me. I had to get a concealed carry permit to protect myself, but I always had to watch it anyway. I never knew when he'd just appear, and I never knew when he would actually do something to me either. A lot of times, the anticipation of something happening to you can be worse than it actually happening. I used to be a manager at a Borders bookstore. It was a pretty good job, and I enjoyed working there a lot. I was an assistant manager who enjoyed when I was the only manager in the store. Because of that, I often volunteered to work all day on holidays and allow the other managers to take the day off as well. This became a very regular thing with me. My first year there, I went ahead and took the opportunity to work on Valentine's Day as well. It wasn't like I was dating anyone at the moment, so it was pretty easy for me to slot in. I agreed to open and close the store, so I was the only manager working the entire day. I spent a large amount of time just taking it easy back in the offices, mostly working on Microsoft Excel sheets for making the schedules for upcoming weeks. I got a page to dial a certain extension. I picked up and called, and one of my employees told me I needed to go over to the security cameras. Apparently, there was someone in the store walking around in a huge bee costume. Naturally, I thought that was quite odd. I went up and went over to the security office. We had 4 televisions in that room, with several cameras that could be switched back and forth between. As I looked over at the monitors, I noticed something over on the camera that was focused in the cafe area. It was exactly what my employee had told me. There was a man that seemed to be dressed in this huge bumblebee costume. He was walking around and bothering the customers. He was also holding what looked like a huge construction paper heart in his hand. I have to admit, I was at a complete loss as to how to handle this situation. I can easily say this was never covered in my management training, nor anything of that sort. I wasn't sure if he was soliciting or harassing, just seemed like he was going around the cafe acting kinda crazy. Well, crazy in my perspective at least. Anybody in a bee costume in a random Borders bookstore had to be a little bit off balance at least. For a few moments, I just kinda watched the guy on the security cameras. He was quite large actually. As he moved around the store, he was sort of dancing back and forth. After a bit of arguing back and forth with myself, I finally decided this must be bad for business. I knew I had to at least go and see what this bee wanted. I walked out of the offices and made my way up to the cash register area. The bee person was just kind of prancing about in front of them. A few people were bent out of shape about it as well. The customers were completely avoiding this man. I wasn't really looking forward to having to confront this person. I tried to get the bee's attention, but he mostly ignored me as he continued to randomly dance around. I followed him around, trying to tell him I was the manager and he was disrupting business, so he had to leave right now. Eventually, out of complete frustration, I told him if he didn't leave the store right this instant, I would call the police and have him removed. Well, that got his attention. The bee had a pen with him and began to scribble something on the construction paper heart he was carrying. He handed it over to me, then began to dance right out the front door of the store. Once the bee was gone, I looked down at what he'd written. "Big B says you're dead." It was weird, but I wasn't really too concerned about it. By the time the store closed, I had put the incident out of my head almost completely. I mean, I hadn't really forgotten about it because honestly, who could ever forget such a weird experience? But I also wasn't putting too much thought into it either. I closed up the store and allowed the other regular employees to go home. After I was done counting up the money and setting up the systems, I went to the security office to turn off the monitors as well. When I did so, I saw the man in the bee costume just standing at the front door of the store. I watched him, holding up another construction paper heart. He turned to display it to the camera, and I saw it read, "Remember what Big B said?" He must have been standing there for a while, because he couldn't have known when I would walk into the office. I decided I would go up to the front of the store and call through the doors to let him know I was going to call the police if he didn't leave. By the time I got there, though, he had already disappeared. I didn't know if I should call the cops if the bee-man was really gone. I was really hesitant to leave the store now as well. I went back into the office and watched the monitors for over half an hour. It seemed he wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. When I was finally sure I was safe, I set the alarm for the store and left and locked the doors behind me. I very cautiously walked around to the side where the employees were allowed to park. As I walked around the corner, though, standing just off in the distance was that damn bee watching me. He had been waiting just out of sight of where the cameras couldn't see him. He was holding a knife this time instead of a heart. Those words from earlier rang through my head. "Big B says you're dead." I began to sprint toward my car as I saw the bee rapidly begin moving toward me. Fortunately, I was closer to my car than he was. I was able to get into it and lock it before he got to me. To my luck as well, the horror movie cliche of the car not starting didn't affect me at all. I started to pull my car out. I almost smacked right into the bee person, which I really didn't mind. I shifted into drive and took off out of that parking lot. As I looked back into the rear view mirror, I saw that bee just dancing around like he'd been doing inside the store. In that moment, I thought to myself, man, that is one sick fucker. I wasn't really sure what I could do about this bee man. I guess I could call the cops, but he was in a costume, so I didn't really have a description of him, other than he was a big guy in a bee costume. I highly doubted he would still be wearing it when they arrived there. Any big guy I saw around the store could have been him. Any big guy I'd see in the parking lot in the future could also be him. It made every night at work a nightmare, and I never left the building alone at night again. My junior high school crush was named Adam. Yes, I'm a guy, and yes, I am gay. I was out at the time, and no one really had much of a problem with it seemed. I mean, there was always going to be some jerks around who'd make some lame comments or throw stupid insults at you for something you had no control over, but for the most part, no one really gave me a hard time. Although I had a huge crush on Adam, I was never disrespectful about it, and I was positive that he never knew. A lot of guys always freak out that they may be in the locker room being stared at by a gay guy or whatever. Well, if you were, it wasn't going to be me. I hated the whole locker room experience. Mostly I'd just do my thing, change, and leave. I tried not to stare too long when I saw him in the hallway either. When you have a crush on someone, it's best to not make them uncomfortable. I was already very happy just having my crush and knowing that he would never know about it. My best friend Tammy, though, thought I should just tell him that I liked him. She told me that everyone in the school knew I was gay anyway, so what could it hurt in the end? If he wanted to kick my ass for being gay or whatever, he would have done it a long time ago. At worst, he'd just tell me that he didn't like me back and wasn't interested. I'd be heartbroken for a little while or whatever, but at least I'd have it out of my system. Well, despite Tammy's encouragement, I never had the courage to go through. She wasn't as shy about it as I was, though. One day in the cafeteria, about a week before Valentine's Day, she actually just went up and told Adam that I liked him. I didn't know what his reaction was. I was too embarrassed and humiliated to stay for it. I very quickly ran out of there. For the next week, I just did my best to avoid him altogether. Tammy told me that Adam hadn't believed her and hadn't said much else. I don't know, seemed like a weak explanation to me. He was obviously uncomfortable with the revelation, and Tammy's idea had backfired. Now I was too shy to even look at him at all. Tammy apologized profusely, of course, but she insisted it was better to know that he was not interested for sure. I wasn't so convinced though. On Valentine's Day, I left the school right after it let out without talking to anyone, not even Tammy. There was this small wooded area behind the school I used to go through on my way home. As I was walking up to it though, this time I heard someone call out my name from behind me. Looking back, I was very shocked to see Adam running up to me. My heart started beating rapidly, more out of fear than anything else honestly. When he got up to me though, he had this huge smile on his face. "Thanks for stopping," Adam said, smiling at me. "I wanted to give you something." "What is it?" I asked, still thinking it was going to be a knuckle sandwich. Adam reached into his book bag and pulled out a heart-shaped box of Valentine's chocolates. I'd be happy if you'd share some of these with me." I was so overjoyed I couldn't even respond. All I could do was nod with the biggest shit-eating grin in history spread across my face. Adam and I sat down behind a tree. He opened up the box of chocolates and held them out to me. I took one and ate it. He set the box on his lap as he talked to me. Once I was done with the first piece, he offered me another. He talked about more things to me, but at this point I could barely understand a word he was saying. I was so elated. By the time I'd gotten 5 pieces in, I was giddy as hell. It was then that I took note that Adam hadn't eaten a single piece of the candy. I looked over at him as he was talking and realized I really had no idea what he was even saying to me. It wasn't that I was so elated I didn't understand. I could see his lips moving, but I couldn't understand any of the words he was saying. As I laid back against the tree, I saw Adam reach over to me. He grabbed my jacket and began to pull it off me. Everything seemed to disappear for a moment. I can't really explain it. It's like nothing was there. I couldn't tell if it was a short time or a long time or no time at all. I opened my eyes. Adam had taken my shirt off and was pulling my belt off and unbuttoning my jeans. I was confused. Did Adam just slip me a date rape drug? He knew I had a crush on him. Why did he think he needed to slip me anything? He began to pull my jeans off, and that was really the last thing I remembered. When I began to come around, I felt very weird. At first, I had no idea where I was or how I'd even gotten there. There was some pain in my groin, but the confusion was worse. I looked around. I was alone, and it was pitch black. I appeared to be naked as well. As I looked down, my head cleared, and I could see why I was in pain. My crotch was completely covered in ants. Looking at the ground, I saw a huge column of them on their way to and from me. I tried to get up, but I was too groggy at first. I tried to shoo the ants off as well, but I was sticky. I didn't know what they were doing to cause so much pain. I tried to get up, and when I first did, I landed on my arm against the tree, breaking it. The pain helped me become a bit more aware though. I got up and shooed the ants off me still, although it didn't do any good. It seemed I wasn't too far away from the school. I looked around, but I couldn't find my clothes anywhere. The only thing I had to cover myself with was the leftover Valentine's Day box. I ignored the pain in my crotch and my broken arm, holding the box over me and running to the school. A few people saw me and laughed their asses off. I finally made it though, and was taken to the nurse's office and then to the hospital. Unfortunately, once I got cleaned off, my crotch was very red and very sore. It looked like there was going to be some permanent scarring once it healed. It didn't seem like there was any major damage to the organs themselves, fortunately. Apparently, Adam and his buddies hadn't planned this out very well. My arm was put into a cast, of course, my first one ever. I was too embarrassed by the whole thing to even tell people Adam had done it. I kept the explanation to myself. For nearly 2 weeks, I was in complete pain whenever I walked around. I had to take the laughs of my peers, but nothing hurt worse than the laughs of Adam and his friends whenever I saw them from then on. The worst part of this all was 5 years later. I saw Adam again, dancing in a gay bar. So I guess he actually was gay, which made this whole gay-bashing incident even worse. I was still pissed at him for what he did. Fortunately though, I knew some big, strong guys who were good friends of mine, and they weren't opposed to helping me get some revenge on my high school crush. This is a close call with a stranger I had when I was younger. It's something I didn't fully realize the severity of until I was much older. My mom had left me and my brother home alone this day. It was around midday, I think. My brother was 12, maybe 13, and I was 9 years old. I was just kinda watching him play Xbox in our living room. He had his headset on and was talking to his friends when there was a knock on the door from our carport. I ran over and answered the door without even looking. It was a grown man I had never seen before. We were still separated by the screen door, but at the time it was unlocked. "Hey there, Missy. Are your parents home?" A bit of horror washed over me. First of all, he was knocking from the carport, which was strange in and of itself. Wouldn't a stranger go knock on your front door? Our carport was empty as well. We only had one car, and my mother had taken it out. The man definitely knew my parents weren't home. I was afraid. I wasn't quite sure why yet, but I knew I was scared. Immediately, my brother in the other room came to mind. I never had a father figure growing up. My brother had always been the one to make me feel safe, the strongest person in the entire world to me, someone who could protect me in any situation. But he was doing something else right now. I began to feel as though I could barely speak. Wide-eyed, I managed to at least stutter out, My big brother's here." Without even a moment's pause, though, the man reached for the screen door and started to pull it open. Like an act of divine intervention, an arm reached out behind me over my shoulder and grabbed the door. My brother rushed past me, holding the door and forcing the man back. The man sprinted out of the carport and closed the door behind him. The man came back around to the front and told my brother he was looking to buy some shitty old swing set that was in our front yard at the time. My brother came back in without saying anything to me. He put on his headset and continued playing. I sat down as well and continued to watch him, and the man left soon after. I don't believe we ever told our mom. Luckily, I never encountered this person again, and it almost faded from my memory. As I got older and started to understand more, though, it became one of the scariest things that ever happened to me. Maybe creepy not so much because of what actually happened, but what easily could have. It was unnerving how absolutely oblivious both of us were. I like to think the man was planning to just lock me in a room, rob the place, and leave immediately after. But who knows? People can be so evil.